there, St. John Nicholas, with my friendly bow, the feast of reason and the flow of soul.
Hello, and welcome to Feast of Reason. On this episode, our guest is Anne Riley, author of many books, the most recent of which, The Human Idea, is a fascinating exploration of how we understand what it means to be human, how that has evolved over time, and why that matters. This is tracing the explanation of the moral circle, asking who we include, who we exclude, and what responsibilities flow from that. It's a theme that sits right at the heart of what we explore on this podcast, how ideas, tested and refined over time, shape the way we live together. We'll have a lot to talk about today. There's a lot of synergy between her work and what I've done, and a few little places where I think we can have some great discussion. Anne, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I am so happy to be here.
Well, let's start maybe telling us a little bit about your background and how that all rolled up into into the human idea.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm the 11th of 12 children, which
Wow.
it totally affected how I grew up and how I see the world, because my dad was a scientist and we were all sort of, everything had to sort of make sense. Or the question a lot of was, what were you thinking as children? Which when you have to say, Dad, I wasn't thinking,
Yeah. Yeah.
that did not fly, and 6 boys and 6 girls. So there was a lot of activity in my family. But also enough people that I could get away and think on my own and not have anybody sort of watching, what I was doing. So I grew up very independent of mind. And I began thinking very quickly. I was in Catholic school and I learned about evolution in 4th grade. Don't know how that happened back in the 60s, but that's what happened. And it got me thinking about how humans fit in the world, and there's this creation story from religion, and then there's this evolution story from, science and Darwin and fossils and all this stuff. And I've been wondering about it ever since. And I read a book when I was, I read Darwin, I read a lot of Stephen Jay Gould, a lot of science-backed biology books that kind of said, everything makes sense. This is why an animal is the way it is. This is, this is why variation occurs. And then I read a book by Michael Rothschild called Bionomics. And in that book, it was brilliant, by the way. He lined up economic systems to biological systems. And I was like, oh, that's brilliant. But I didn't agree with his conclusions, because he decided that after, discussing all these aspects of life, he said, oh, competition is the only way we can go. And I was like, no, you just talked about collaboration and coordination as well as competition. But what really begged the question for me was that if economic systems are like biological systems, humans must be like biological systems. So, but humans are different. So it's got to be seamless. What is it? So I set off on a journey to kind of just figure that out. And I had to I started looking for the patterns in nature. And what I found was that indeed the patterns existed, but we have to look at humans just a little bit differently in order to see the patterns. We tend to look at humans as a network, that life is a network of integrated life forms, which it is. It's totally a network of integrated life forms. But it also has a pattern of how it's been built. It's, life starts at DNA. Your genome has thousands of genes that instruct the body how to act. It does everything that you need. You're born with this DNA, and an animal is born with this DNA, and it can do everything it can to survive. It has all the instructions. And though that DNA is contained in a cell, and the cell is the thing that does all the living, so I went through this and kind of figured out the patterns and found out that humans and life forms have the very same patterns of existence, but they work off of different levels. And that's when I went, I understand. And so that's when I wrote the book. And I feel like I answered the question about how humans seamlessly fit in the entire universe, not just in life on Earth, but in the entire universe.
So how would that idea, that concept of how humans fit in the universe, align with, say, something like panpsychism, where people who believe that consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe, and that human consciousness is just one sort of aggregate form of that? Is that how, or how would you differentiate it from that belief?
I would um, I would just say that it's like I would have no opinion. I would say no. Brains evolved. And brains evolved in from life forms that I mean, every living thing. Plants have neural systems, but not brains. But human, every animal has a brain because animals move, right? And they need a big brain in order to coordinate all that movement and all that stuff. It's an evolutionary thing. Consciousness is an evolutionary aspect of a brain that humans have that other animals maybe don't have to the extent we do. If somebody wants to say there's a big old consciousness out there, I would say there's a lot of energy out there that we can't see. And if that's part of consciousness, great. But I don't have any opinion on that and wouldn't go there
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it just isn't anything I can grab onto and say, yeah, that's real. Well, like I can with humans, even though I make this leap, because you can't measure consciousness. You can't measure, you can measure brain activity, but you can't measure an idea. I make the point that you can't open up a head and say, oh, there's the idea for making coffee today. It doesn't work like that.
yeah,
They're
yeah.
distributed out into the synapses. And the brain is that link between the physical world and this non-physical world of an idea. And that's as far as I can leap.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's really interesting. I want to kind of contrast that, or equate it to maybe more, this idea that we have in New Autonism, of that the entire human experience is sort of made up of these two domains that Spinoza identified: thought and extension. So it's essentially, mind, what we can, and body, right? We kind of think of it that way. And these are
Mm-hmm.
the two attributes that are available to us, to our powers of
Right,
perception, that are just this tiny little glimpse into the whatever the infinite is, right?
right,
And so the looking at it that way, and then the idea that God, or nature, as Spinoza put it, is revealed to us through reason. We go through the process of, every time we learn a new thing, we know one more thing about everything.
right,
And to sort of overlay that over what you just said, what I'm hearing is that you we have knowledge about evolution and how evolution works. We understand how brains evolve. We have a lot of information that leads us to the best explanation for where consciousness comes from is brain activity. But we don't know there's anything about the universe being conscious, or why consciousness even
right.
happened, what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. That's all speculative. And so it sounds like you're standing at what I would call the fork in the road. And the fork in the road
Mm-hmm.
is our current level of knowledge, and from there are all kinds of different speculative paths, and
Right,
we have to, the process of reason is going down these paths and going, well, that one doesn't go anywhere, and coming back and trying
right,
another one, and eventually we
right,
come up with one that works. So is
right.
that
Yeah,
equate?
and where I stopped, and where I felt the reason why I stopped there was because I felt that was the fork in the road was very important because humanity is at that fork in the road
Right,
where I think our ideas, which have been evolving over the years, are now coming in conflict with our very ability to survive. Climate change, nuclear annihilation, autocracy, I mean tyranny. We are fast approaching a place where we cannot, we may not. We're the only animal who can make ourselves go extinct, and I'm afraid we're entering that area. And so what I wanted to do was go back and say, well, you know, nature has survived for 3.8 billion years. How?
Yeah.
What did they do that makes them to survive? And I think where I came to it is I looked at because humans are so collaborative, I looked at how nature collaborates, how those cells collaborate in the world. And if you look at your body, it's made up of 35 trillion cells. Cells do all the living, as I mentioned before. Cells are the one thing that lives. It's our living unit, right? And those cells, collaborate to make a body, and that body is also has a unique footprint in the world, right? So if you look at the same kind of thing in humans, we work the same way, but we start not with DNA, which our physical bodies do, to Spinoza. We are born with all our physical bodies and we are completely physical creatures, but we also are born with the ability to create ideas. And ideas are the basic unit of what I
Yeah.
call the human ecosystem, or the idea sphere,
Yeah.
I call it. And that
Yeah.
and how does that work? Where DNA is the base, ideas are the base. And when DNA is incorporated into a genome, well, our ideas are incorporated into our mind. And then the cell is the living thing because it can use all that DNA and it has all the proper parts to put those instructions into action. Well, a human being, that person is the person who can take all those ideas and put them into action. They're exactly parallel, and so when I look at how there's an equivalent between a body and a society, humans get together to figure out how to live together, and we call that a
Right.
society. Well, cells get
Yeah.
together in a body and live. So how do they collaborate? That's what I was working on, and I looked at how humans collaborate and the decisions we make, and they are very, very different than the underlying goal and value of nature. Nature collaborates by saying this: hey, cells, do what you want. You guys got your jobs, go do it. Heart cell, do the heart thing. Liver cell, do the liver thing, right? And guess what? You can do whatever you want, but don't hurt the other cells. Because if you hurt the other cells, we are going to damage the body. And so
Yeah.
we can't do that. But when we go to society and we'd say, the equivalent would be to say, hey, people, you like liberty? Go do liberty. Do it. Do whatever you want. But you can't harm the other people in your society. And we do not live that way. Our systems aren't, I think our Constitution was originally set up that way. Provide for the general welfare, provide for the common good. But that is not what has been implemented over time. And we have degraded that ability of do what you want, maximize your choice because you're thinking people and you like to choose, right? But you can't harm other people. We have a lot of places where, we harm other people. And so I was looking at, well, how, if we were going to act more like nature, what would our decisions look like as a government, as a company, as individuals?
Okay. I think it might be worth it to kind of parse out nature a little bit because it sounds to me when you're talking about nature, you're talking about the way organisms work, right? The way cells and organisms work, which is a little different from if you sort of go big picture nature. I mean, like to me, nature is this obviously this wonderful thing that provides us with all this abundance, but it's also doing its damnedest to kill us off. It's the whole process of nature is the survival of the fittest. The natural selection is wiping out the weak, and it's this tremendous churn. And I think one of the things that what modernity has done is we've flipped the script on that nature's priority. So this is like Richard Dawkins, right? The selfish gene,
Right.
the priority of genes to survive. We flipped the script and said, no, we want to have a comfortable, longer, comfortable, more prosperous lives, and we want to benefit our species over. We are able to prioritize that over the genetics. So is that a divide you're comfortable with? The difference between an
Well,
organism and
I would,
a
yeah,
species?
I would describe it a little bit differently. I would say when we talked about collaboration, there is that animals and maybe colonies are the highest level of collaboration in nature, right? Cells communicate with each other and they have a brain and a neural system to coordinate all that activity. And it's a very extensive, very tight organization, right? But and colonies are the only thing that's evolved above a body. Colonies like bees, the bees act as cells and they go out and benefit the hive, right? They go out, some of them feed the babies, some of them go out and get nectar and come back in. So a colony is a bigger collaborative unit than a body. But after that, there is no way for an animal to take its collaborative skill and apply it outside its body. It hasn't evolved that way. It hasn't. I mean, there is no way a tiger can control a gazelle's movement, right? We don't. So what's left is competition, of course. And that's what we see is on the greatest level is competition. But humans are collaborative in nature. We could make the whole world collaborate and agree and be and live together with common rules if we wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
we have. I think the goal our humans have. They've created lots of ideas, and they've made their lives better. But what I would say is they broke the rules that nature uses to make sure they survive. I would say that humans they can choose, and they've not chosen a survival goal necessarily. They've chosen, this is an easier life, but the consequences are becoming clearer. If you wreck the air so much that you can no longer breathe it, you die, right? Nature doesn't lose the battle in the long run. The earth will stay, and animals who survive will stay. People may go, So
Yeah.
I would say that where we are as a tipping point is that we have to now balance how do we create these things and this easier life that we want with making sure it's compatible with this earth and this nature so that we can survive. I think life forms have created a survival, a mode of survival that works. It's been working for 3.8 billion years. And it will work after we're gone. But and we should look, what I'm saying, we should look at how they do that and see if we can't revise our things. Yeah, we still want easier lives, we still want to create things, we still want ideas, but how can we do it in a way that's more what I would call sustainable so that we can survive?
Yeah. So it is one thing to be living in harmony with that process, to use it, or living in such a way where we can produce the material progress and prosperity that we have, while not affecting nature's systems in a way that
Right.
reduces the biosphere's ability to support life. But it's another thing to do it in a manner that is directly consistent. It is not necessarily the same thing as doing it in a way that's directly consistent with the nature system. So maybe you could give an example of a way we're doing something wrong that's counter to a specific nature system, and how we might do it right by adhering closer to that nature system.
Right. Okay. I have as a basis for understanding. So in humans, the brain is the coordinating system. Their job is to make sure that all the cells work together and do their jobs at the right time and do the right thing and help the body survive. The equivalent in human land is governments. Governments are the system that we create to coordinate how we live together, right? And we have all kinds of designs of. I think a king is one where the king kind of gets all the advantage and the people kind of just hang around and support the king. But in a democracy, we all sort of govern ourselves and choose a subset of people to be our leaders, right? Okay, so that's the basic. So let's use it as an example, taxation. So in nature, there is no taxation. Well, actually, I'm sorry. It's the opposite. There's about 100% taxation. I think the body is a socialist, right? Because the mouth and the stomach eat, right? And everybody gets fed. Every single cell gets fed. They distribute through the blood system, the circulation system. Every cell gets fed. Because if every cell doesn't get fed, the body fails. So that's how it works. So in our system, what we do is we say, okay, everybody, you earn your own stuff, and then take out all your expenses, and whatever's left, give it to the government. A percentage goes to the government. Well, that's like feeding the brain last, when the brain's supposed to be coordinating everything, and you're doing your very best not to give the government anything. Right? When
Right.
you have lawyers who go to court and say, I'm not going to pay, and it's no surprise that the biggest companies have like a really low tax rate, like 2%, right? And
Right.
you and I might pay closer to our 30% or our 12% or whatever it is. You know, so nature would never do that. Nature would never do it that way. So what we would do to be more like nature is we'd say, hey, okay, everybody, since every cell has to do their job, every person who earns money pays a little bit off the top, a revenue tax, right off the top. Everybody, it doesn't matter if you're a business or a church or this. It's your price to be in our country. You pay a tiny revenue tax, maybe 1%, something like that. And then everybody participates and everybody gets, the revenue comes in. But the other income tax is only saved for the super high earners, because what they can do is they can accumulate so many resources that they can affect the human systems we've created. So you want to prevent that from happening. In nature, if a animal comes upon a windfall of resources, the first thing they will do is create a new generation of babies, right? Because survival is the greatest goal, and that's one of their jobs is, hey, you get resources, you make babies, okay? And then next, if they get even more resources and more resources, everything in the body will have to store it, because every cell gets a little piece, and then they'll store more, and then guess what? The animal gets slow and fat, and guess what? It gets to become prey for some other quicker predator. And so nature, by virtue of the combination of collaboration and competition, stays fleet and swift. But we don't do that. We have no controls there. And if we don't pull those resources back into the system, those resources will accumulate and accumulate and accumulate in these few people, and they will start affecting the systems. And we see that today. We have private money affecting governments and elections. We have people, going in and taking their money and just buying up other competitors so that we don't have a system that works. I would say we are now, if not in an oligopoly, we are close to it, because so few people own so many resources that they can affect our coordination, our competition, and our collaborative systems. So
Yeah. Okay.
taxation would look
So
different. Yeah, that's how. So taxation would look very different under a nature-based set of rules.
okay. One thing I want to ask in what you said there is, you identify government as sort of the brain,
Yes.
but government is one institution, and but certainly not the only one. We have, there's journalism, there's institutions, medical institutions. There are all of these groups, large, groups of people who are experts in a particular domain, who are constantly have these self-correcting mechanisms where they're,
Right. Right.
in my language, they're using the process of reasoning. In your language, it's the idea sphere, where they're taking ideas and hashing them out and seeing, this process of finding out what is the best explanation, what is most likely to be true, what is most likely to work, happens across a lot of different institutions, and government is one, obviously, very large example of it. And there's similar kinds of problems with the corruption to the system, or maybe you would say the infection that
Right.
happens to
Right.
those
Right.
biological
Right.
systems.
Well, I would disagree with you. Government is the coordinating institution. It is the one that people elect to run how we live together. That is different than journalism. What you're talking about with churches and companies and all kinds of institutions, those are like the organs in a body, right? We have a collection of cells that make up the heart, and that heart does a specific thing. It pumps the blood and has a role in the body, right? And a journalism is a subset of people that have ideas about truth and communication that run a subset of the society. And they have different jobs. But the government the only job of government should be to coordinate how we work together. That means they set the rules. The goals are set here in our case by the Constitution. They set the rules. And then those rules, they govern all the institutions and the people in them. Okay, so that's where I would really differ you. Government is not another institution. It is the coordinating institution. Journalism does not coordinate people. Churches do not, well, they try, but they don't coordinate people the way government does. It's like, no, here are the rules we live by. That's very different in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I like that, the analogy of the organs. That makes sense to me. Well, but governments, what they make essentially are laws, right? And regulations,
Right.
and there's kind of the rules of the road, which is a lot of what governs human behavior
Right.
are what I would call social norms. So there are all kinds of things that we do because it's what one does, and we do it because if we will lose social points if we don't. And it's like this. Steven Pinker's new book, everybody knows what everybody knows, is very strong on this, talking about how we act a certain way because we know that somebody knows what we know, and we know that they know that we know it. So I think that's a very powerful governor of human behavior. And I think the more
Right.
prosperous and established a society, the more that is a factor, right? If you're desperate,
Right.
you're not going to care about social norms.
Right, right. Well, I think that, again, I would say that those are, I go back to do a little bit of how I see history is that when humans started, right, we wondered why things happen the way they are, and right, and what did we do in tribes everywhere and groups of people. We created deities that were the early science, right? They were like, well, the sun goes across the sky, must be some guy in a chariot, right? And they all go, and every day the sun came up, they're like, must be, that seems
Yeah,
right. And so what
yeah,
happened is every society created its norms so that people could live together. That makes sense. What I'm saying is that when they made those rules, they didn't know about cells and DNA and the way a body collaborates. They had no idea. They're just doing the best they can. And the things that you're talking about have grown for thousands of years. People have created norms, and it's funny because different tribes, different norms, right? There's all kinds of different ways we see the world. And as the world gets smaller with information, they clash, right? But what I'm saying is the way bodies do it is they have one rule. Like you said, the job of coordinating has three aspects. You set a goal, you set the rules, you enforce the rules, right? And so the thing about bodies is they don't have to set the rules. They're in the DNA. They don't have to set the goal. It's set as survival because all you have to do is survive. The rules are in DNA. All they have to do is enforce them. So that's all the brain does in the body is enforce rules. It says, hey, if you cut your finger and there's cells bleeding all over, they send down the troops and say, hey, fix that finger because we can't have an infection. We don't want to do it. We're going to fix that. All they do is enforce rules. But governments, people are born with absolutely no ideas, right? Absolutely none. We're born with all our physical attributes and no ideas. So we have to start life by learning stuff. And where do we learn it? From everybody else who's learned it, right? And what subset of stuff we learn is the stuff that makes us who we are, right? And so when, it took, from maybe 20,000 years ago when people began to write up until 1700 to create a constitution that says, hey, maybe we shouldn't maybe people should govern themselves and elect people who represent what they want. That's a long time before we even kind of got philosophically to a place that says, sort of close to nature, hey guys, do what you want, but don't harm the other guy. You know, so governments have to create the goal. They have to create the rules, and then they have to enforce them. That's 3 jobs. Then nature only has 1 job. And so of course people are going to come up with different ideas about governing, different rules, and different ways to enforce them. It's very complicated to be a human compared to being another being in nature.
Yeah, fair enough. Although there is some pretty solid evidence that there are some moral ideas that are intrinsic, that we're born with. There was been studies with really young children, too young to know, to have absorbed much across all kinds of different cultures and with different moralities. Though things like don't do harm to others, reciprocity, and fairness seem to be really kind of basic and intrinsic. And it makes sense, at least to me, that this is something that would evolve, and as part of
I would agree.
our collaborative nature, right, would incentivize people to kind of be that way. So I think there is some base morality and ideas, if you will, there that we're born with.
And I think those would be akin to, I would say, not just children have those, but animals have those. I mean, if you look at the way mothers take care of their babies, or where animals just rarely will go after another animal of their own size because it's too risky. It's like inherently their genetic evolution has given them some behaviors that say, I'm not doing that, And so, yeah, I think that's true. But what I would ask you is then how the heck do we, go to war so easily? How are we, we are creating ideas with people that say, it's okay to enslave others. It's okay to abuse children. Not what I mean. We have ideas that people do harm others here, and those are learned ideas. And I think education is critically important, and I think we're failing a little bit in that by not teaching more. We teach kids a lot about how to get a job and live in the world and get the skills you need to make a living, but we don't teach a lot of skills about how to live together. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
we left it to chance. And I think that this is a real opportunity to have, especially because we're becoming more and more connected, that we need to do a better job of giving people ideas about how we live together peacefully. And if we just did that, we might have a more peaceful world than we have today.
Yeah, no, agree with that. I think though, if you look at the arc of human progress, right, and I think starting with the fact that, setting aside the fact that I think there's some clear, problems that we have, and there's some clear ways that we're regressing at the moment, right? But if you look
Right.
at, over thousands of years, it's this collaborative nature that humans have, right? At which we have over that time we've learned to collaborate in larger and larger groups. And what I call the process of reason, kind of what you call the idea sphere, that these trying out these different ideas, we have managed to make a lot of progress, not just materially, but also morally and ethically, right? We are, we're at a point now where it's a pretty rare person who thinks that slavery is okay, for example, right? Which
Right.
for
Exactly.
all
Exactly.
of human history up until just, a few hundred years ago was completely acceptable and even endorsed by all, by religions and
Right.
seen as totally moral.
Right.
So
Right.
over time, we make that progress, and things like the U.S. Constitution, or maybe more currently the International Declaration of Human Rights, the
Right.
ICCPR. I forget what that acronym is,
Right.
but these are
Right.
non-sectarian, non-dogmatic, non-religious statements of morality and how we should treat each other. They go across all
Right.
cultures and everything, and now. But we've got a lot of people to sign that. 174 countries or something have signed it. How well that's really the enforcement part of that, how well that's really being enacted, and how well we're following it. I would argue, particularly the current U.S. government is following that,
Right.
is
Right.
pretty It's another story.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I agree with you, and I think that like I said, these ideas that nature has aren't new.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of highlighting them and saying, "Hey, let's look at this." Just like you're highlighting them and saying, "Hey, look at this from a slightly different perspective." I'm using nature as my base. You're using reason as your base. It's the same, but the messages are true. But why? My question was, and this is what I've been kind of thinking about lately, is so why don't those things hold? Why don't they hold? And I think when you go back, I think fundamentally, life has just one goal, right? They survival, right? Humans get to choose their goal. And I think what's happened, and it's been inexorable. I don't think it's been under the surface, but I think what drives humanity as a whole, not individuals, because you've got people who are creating reason and these rules for living together, right? All over the place. We've got all kinds of people who are thinking in these other terms, in these let's coexist together and non-sectarian. But here, I think overall humanity's goal is wealth accumulation, unfortunately. And as long as people are trying to accumulate as much wealth as possible, no matter where they are, it's going to cause, it's not a survival mechanism. Like I said, if nature does that, you just sooner or later you're going to get bumped off because you're slow and fat. But here, you can game the system and game it and game it and game it until, and
Yeah.
everybody has to go along with that 1% who's gaming the whole system. Everybody else has to
Yeah.
go along with it. And I think this is, it's not everybody, but it doesn't have to be everybody. It's the resources that get collected by such a few number of people that has
Right.
become our human goal. And I don't think it's a
Yeah.
good one. I think it's a recipe for disaster. And I think what we're
Yeah.
seeing is this. I think the Trump administration is a complete huge greed machine. And they are starting wars to make money. They are doing these things to make money. They are, and it's like stupid. It's like the guy's gonna, he's 80 years old. He's not gonna live forever, and he can't take it with him. But boy, is he gonna try to accumulate as much wealth as possible while he's living. And it is wrecking the entire world right now. He's in a position of power, and he's wrecking the whole world. And he is making the world a worse place. And even though there might be millions of people who are creating these good rules and are working really hard to be kind to each other and recycle and do all these things, it doesn't compare to this one guy with all of his power doing so much damage.
Yeah.
And that's where I think humans really are. Whether we like it, practically speaking, wealth accumulation is what humans are doing, and wealth accumulation will kill them.
I think it's the lack of a stop mechanism. We need a GLP-1 synthesizer for greed. Right? You would just say,
Exactly. Well,
okay,
and you know what that is taxation. What you do
yeah,
is never let them get to that point. Give them enough so that they can have their toys, but don't give them enough to game the system. That's where
yeah,
the job of government is to pull it back and say, nope, we're reinvesting this into people, in education, in clean water, in healthcare, in all these other things, in peace talks, in aid to a foreign country that needs help. That's what we should be doing. Taxation is the most efficient mechanism for doing that, and that is a government coordination mechanism. That's what your body does. No
yeah,
cell gets it all. No, everybody gets a piece. And then after that, okay, so my hips get a few extra cells because they have to store it near the stomach. That's what they do. Hips and stomachs get extra if you eat too much, right? Because they're close to the when you ingest all your food, they're close enough to it to be like, okay, that's a quick trip. We'll do that. But we don't do that. And we're letting this go. In 1986, before in the 50s, our marginal tax rate in the United States was 91% at the very highest rate. 91%. And then in 1986, Ronald Reagan knocked it back to 39% or something. And that's when stuff started. They started treating companies like they were chits, and they could just trade them back and forth. And that started the end. Whereas
yeah,
before, we used that 91% and created roads and education systems and all kinds of great things for people. And that was Eisenhower. He was a Republican, but
He wouldn't be
like,
today, but
yeah, no, he'd be
they would
he'd be a
chase him
major
out of the party
liberal.
in a second. Yeah, forget it. That
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, it was
exactly.
effectively a wealth cap or an income cap, that at that rate. I think
Right. What what
what
what it did was kept the resources moving. And so
yeah,
all those kids who got educated, Bill Gates, all those kids, what did they do? They grew up to make really big companies and moved the society forward in so many ways. It was wonderful. That was the result. But then they got rich and they benefited from the cut tax rates and shut the door for the next generation. And that makes me mad
yeah.
because that's how your generation, that's how your society continues to grow and excel. And why societies die is once the rich win, they close the door for the rest. That's a repeated thing in history, repeated activity in history. And that's the one I think. And if nature did that, they wouldn't be around for 4 billion years. They wouldn't.
I'm going to recommend a book for you if you haven't read it. I believe it's called The Great Upswing, and
Oh,
it's a very, I think you'd like it because you're clearly analytical and love numbers, and it's a very much my favorite when I was in business. I think my favorite business book that I ever read was called Good to Great by a guy named Jim Collins. He applied very analytic, looked at companies that were successful and applied analytics to them to kind of produce what were the consistent things they were doing. And this is a little bit of a similar book, but it compares the golden age at the end of the end of the 19th century over into the first part of the 20th century to kind of what we're going through now. And there's this incredible upswing that from that through the Depression, then and up through the 1950s and 60s we were talking about, where there's all of this positive activity that's happening, all this resource, all this investment, all these great things are happening. And now we're in a situation that's much more like what the Gilded Age was, and it's what
right.
was uplifting about that is it made it sound like, okay, this is a cycle, so this is not a permanent state of affairs. We can bring this back, and we're ready for
Well,
another upswing.
yeah. And what I would
Um,
say is it's a cycle because we haven't changed our mindset, you
right,
know. And what I'm saying is if you change your mindset, you can change the cycles. And if
right,
you start adding a kind of a thing where, an idea where let's keep the resources moving, let's make sure everybody gets educated, let's make sure we do it more like nature, you can change the cycle so that either they're smaller or they're different. And I think this is one where I think we get into that bias of, well, this is how it's always been, and it doesn't have to be that way. These just ideas. These are
yeah.
ideas that we can change. But these are ideas that are in deep in people and they're hard to change. And what I want people to do is widen their perspective to say that, oh, maybe there is a new way to think about this.
Yeah. Just to talk about mindset for a second, because that word really grabbed me. I think one of the things about the reason, right? If you look at the classical philosophers, somebody like Kant maybe would be the extreme example of this. Believe that they can discern truth by just sitting down inside the walls of their own mind and thinking rationally. But I think there's a lot of evidence now tied to neuroscience that people like Jonathan Haidt have looked into. It's just like we actually really suck at reasoning individually, and that we're driven. That David Hume was actually who said reason is a slave to the passions. It
Right.
was actually much closer to being right, and then in fact. We are driven much more by emotion and instinct and these survival embedded things in us, and we use our reasoning powers more often to rationalize those desires. And so I think that's
Absolutely.
a real problem that I think gets addressed by the larger institution. Let's say government. You have to have you're not going to get people to. There's a quote I used in the book that I said. things are really tough for me and my family right now, but I just read a compelling IMF report on the reductions in global poverty, so I'm fine with it. And that quote is attributed to nobody ever, because nobody ever said that.
Exactly,
And
exactly,
so
exactly.
what government and what larger institutions have to do is come up with ways to appeal to those emotions and instincts to get them moving in the right direction. Jonathan Haidt
Right.
uses the analogy of a rider and an elephant. You can, you have a reason is your rider and
Hmm.
the elephant, but the elephant's going to do what the elephant wants to do,
Right,
and more often than not, the rider just rationalizes it. So
right.
I think a strategy based on making everybody really, really great elephant riders is what he would call the rationalist delusion.
Hmm.
I don't think it happens. I think you have to come up with ways to make the elephant want to do the thing that's the right thing for everybody.
Right.
And so,
It's really interesting because the way I don't discuss emotion in my book. Mainly, I just didn't have room. I wanted to keep it concise. But what I would look at is, again, I always go back to nature and say, well, what's happening in nature? And nature is full of animals with emotion. I mean, animals get sad, they cry. I think emotion was our early brain before we had a brain, right? It was the thing that kept us alive before our brains developed. Brains were more coordinating movement and stuff, but emotion was another aspect that kept us alive. And I think that is earlier than a brain. And so it's more primal. And that's why it's built into your body. Whereas thinking and reason is one level up, right? Physical emotion is on that physical level, and
yeah, yeah.
reason and brains are on the top of the idea level, sort of. And so it is. I used to say to myself when I was a kid, before I knew anything, I would say, "Oh man, as soon as I get emotional, my brain turns off," and that's exactly what happens.
Yeah.
If my emotions take over, my brain doesn't have time to think, or it won't have room to think. And so I'm never going to stop that. Emotions are part of the deal. But what I want to do is create an environment where the reason understands that emotions play a role. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
what I did in my book is I talked about truth. I said there's two kinds of ideas. There's truth and non-truth. And there's one flavor of truth, and there's a bunch of flavors of non-truth. And not all of them are bad, but they just are. And truth is only things that are provable and repeatable. I kept it real practical, right? It's like 2 plus 2 equals 4. You can tell the world 2 plus 2 equals 5, but if somebody tries to build a house with the concept of 2 plus 2 equals 5, their house is going to fall down. It's not going to work.
Right.
So the only places that truth exists are in math and science. And even those with humans, you know, science creates theories before they have proof, right? So there's a lot of give in there even. But the non-truth is really interesting. There's opinions, which are, I think blueberries are the best fruit in the world, right? It's just an opinion. And as long as you know it's an opinion, you can use it to process the world. There's a lie, which is a provably false thing that says 2 plus 2 equals 5. Well, that's not true. And you just need to know it's a lie. And you have theories, which are things that are true with the facts we have, but aren't complete, like the theory of evolution. I mean, every fossil we dig up, everything we do, nothing has ever refuted evolution. But we do not have a complete path through the fossil world to say, oh yeah, absolutely. So people are like, oh, there's a gap, so must be intelligent design, and it's like, no. So, and then there's belief. And belief is having no facts, but feeling something is true when it has no facts. And religion falls into that, or I use the example instead of religion, which is very divisive, is that when you get on a plane, the plane is an engineering fact, right? It has math and science all embedded in it. But also, you get on that plane because you believe the plane's going to land safely. If you didn't believe the plane would land safely, you would not get on the plane. So belief is a non-truth, but it's an interesting one, So what I look at is, where is truth? pragmatically what we know, and that's all the farther I will go. The rest of the stuff is informative as non-truths, but I'm going to understand that it's non-true. So that's kind of how I live in the world.
Yeah, I think this isn't really a pushback necessarily, but I think about that a little differently. I think there are, 2 + 2 = 4 is, it's clearly an objective truth, and there's just so many ways that, and then, the moon is made of green cheese is clearly falsifiable, right?
Right.
But there's a lot of real estate in between those two, and
Absolutely.
almost all of which, all the knowledge that we utilize falls into this kind of category of what Karl Popper and David Deutsch would call the current best explanation.
Right.
So
Right.
use evolution as an example. That's really, I think that evolution is a thing, that it happens is an objective truth. I think
Right.
it's as close to 2 + 2 = 4 as you can get. But we
Right.
don't know all of the mechanisms. There's things we don't understand about it. There's a lot more detail. We haven't come up with anything that refutes that basic
Right. Right.
objective truth.
Right.
And then
Right.
the theory of relativity. I mean, all of the things, these devices that we're talking on are all
Mm-hmm.
use chips that use
Right.
the quantum
Right.
mathematics. And I mean,
Right.
there's just so much that it falls into that kind of the gray area. There's this operational knowledge. So that
Right.
fork in the road
Right.
that I was talking about, you can almost never say exactly where it is. It's
Right.
easier to say
Right.
where it isn't, but you kind of can,
Right.
you can come up with a clear enough picture of where it is that you can move from there. And I think
Right.
one of the things you said about belief, talking about religious belief, for me, I prefer the word faith for that because it's belief without evidence.
Right.
As opposed to
Right.
a belief that is the belief when you get on an airplane that it's going to be okay. That's a pretty well supported belief. There's a lot of
Right.
reason and
Yeah.
evidence to
Right.
believe that that's true.
Right, right. I agree with you. And it just, I wanted to use it because I didn't want just to be divisive. In my book, I use that because I don't want to just be divisive about religion. But yeah, religion or faith is, I remember my mom as a Catholic growing up, you have to have faith on me. And I'm like, really? I do? I have to? What's going to make me have to do that? And I was just in butt enough of a 13-year-old to have that conversation. But also, that has been very helpful to me to parse through how to depend on certain information versus not depend on certain information.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think and this is for me ideas, right? Is that a religious narrative. Let's just we're here in the United States of America, so let's say the religious narrative of the resurrection of Jesus, right? That he rose from the dead. If you accept that as a literal truth, if you dogmatically accept that as a literal truth, that's a lot different from saying that story of redemption and the Sermon on the Mount being a guidebook for how to live a moral and ethical life. If you don't accept that as literal truth, and any other story that conflicts with it as a falsehood, and perhaps even one worthy of killing them or having some big fight over it, well then to me that's totally fine. I mean, I would even say that about something like astrology. There's a really interesting poll that I read where there's this huge concern about young people believing in astrology. But when you drilled into it a little bit more, they don't literally believe that their lives are affected by the position of the planets and stars. And not to put too fine a point on it, the position of the planets and stars 2,000 years ago, not today.
right.
But it gives them a framework. It gives them, it's something that's kind of, and so is that really a problem? I think only if you believe it dogmatically. People, love Star Wars. There's a Church of the Jedi. People,
Right.
it really exists. They get the U.S. tax break and the whole deal, and there's this moral framework that they get out of that, and that doesn't really bother people because everyone kind of knows. Well, they don't really believe that
Yeah.
is literally true, although I suspect some of them do.
Right.
You know what I mean? So to me, that's the difference between religion and dogma. I don't think religion, and I say this in my book over and over again,
Yeah.
religion and reason are not antithetical to each other. It's dogma that is.
Well, I would just say that religion, the existence of a God, let me put it that way, is an idea. It's an idea that took hold a long time ago, and people still have it. And
Yeah.
it's but it's an idea. It is not. I mean, you go back to nature, and it's like, does tigers have gods? And is there an oak tree god? Whatever. The native, the indigenous people, a lot of them thought that there were spirits in nature. Because
Yeah.
they didn't know what it was. So
Yeah.
it's just ideas, and ideas are fine, I think. But when you use an idea like a god or a religion, and you don't understand the wider context that lots of people create lots of religious ideas and they might not agree, then you have things like the Crusades in the Middle Ages, and it's like,
Right.
all right, you guys, stop. This is not how you're supposed to do it. Again, I would go back to, even religions have been co-opted by money. I mean, the Catholic Church is
Oh,
super,
yeah.
super wealthy. And it's an
Yeah.
institution that was designed to, hey, go out and get more people so that they'll give us more money. I mean, they said you're collecting soul, you're going out and saving souls, but what they really want was to make themselves richer. And that is where, they didn't say that out loud, but look at the results. So I look at those as ideas that have been shared, and in nature, ideas can't be, or there's no ideas, but right, if you make a change in nature, it has to fit with what's there, or it won't survive. But humans can create bad ideas all over the place, and as long as they're accepted by somebody else and shared and collect a following, that bad idea can stay for years and years and years and years. That's a really big difference between humans and nature, is we don't have to, there's no quality check on our ideas to be good. If you get a following and you get resources behind you, your idea is accepted, good or bad. And I think that's where we are. We have a whole bunch of bad ideas running around, as well as a whole bunch of good ones. And they're all mixed up together in this world we have right now.
Well, I would argue that the quality control program for ideas is the process of reason. I mean, the culture of criticism. When you come up with an idea and people kick it around and they argue and you hammer it out to try to find the best explanation. And that certainly that's most understood as peer review in science, but it certainly happens. That's how things like the U.S. Constitution
I
you get created.
Yes, I wish the world were that way. But what I would say is that ideas are accepted are the ones with the money behind them.
Yeah. Well,
That's
that's
practically speaking. Because what you're saying is the ideal world. If reason was the driving thing that made ideas good or bad, and determined acceptability, we'd have a fantastic world. But we don't. It's not based. I wish it were, but it's not. It's based on who puts money behind it, and because when you have the power, the problem with resources for humans is that when you concentrate the money, you concentrate the power, and
yeah.
that's our problem, and
Yeah.
that's what we've really screwed up, I think. And in that environment, reason can't win. It's right now. It's fighting against people who don't believe in science. In education, in reason, in any of those things. It's not winning right now. I think in the end it will win, because that's the only way we survive. But it's having a run for its money right now.
Well, it sounds like we agree. It just sounds like you're throwing in the towel, and I'm not on reason.
No,
I think.
I have to. Oh, I do sound like. I'm sorry. I don't mean to. I think there's a way to change it. I think we can change turn the steamship around. But I have to understand where I am right now. And for a long time, I was like, well, we need to do what nature does because nature works. But I was trying to finally figure out where we as humans are. And I don't want to throw in the towel. I just want to figure out how to rein in the resource accumulation problem. And then when you rein that in, then maybe something like reason can rise up and have a better chance of winning, which is what I agree with you, I would love.
So what you just described sounds an awful lot like what I call in my book, the cycle of human flourishing. And the way I identified that is I say that cycle is people reason individually and then collectively, and that produces knowledge, which produces
Hmm.
progress, which then,
Hmm.
if you can connect that progress to that process of reason, develops trust in reason, which then fuels more people doing reason. So I
I
think the
love that.
problem is, like, if you look at the U.S., I think it's this I would say perceived, or I would say relative prosperity decline. Right, you've got all these people in the U.S. and say a place like the English Midlands who are not doing as well as their parents and grandparents did, and who fear, quite rightly, that the children are going to do worse. So in
Hmm.
that environment, they don't see reason and progress as benefiting them. And so by
Right.
correcting some of the inequality issues, right, that you're talking about, I think you
Hmm.
create an environment where maybe reason's got a fighting chance.
I,
That's
I
how I
I
would argue it.
totally agree, and I love that idea. I like how you said that there, because you really are. My husband always talks about the K-shaped economy. That there's a K-shape where the spending is all at the top and everybody at the bottom is just struggling. But in the
Yeah,
50s, we didn't do that. We moved that money into education and opportunity and recreation opportunities. We created such a boom of thinkers, and then they got, after protesting the war in Vietnam, then they went and got rich, and then they closed the door for the next group. And that's what happens. What we're seeing is the door closing on
yeah,
people because of the need to have more wealth. And it's a weird need. It's like you can't take it with you. You can't, but it allows them to control the mechanisms of power, and that
yeah.
is what they want. And it's an ego thing. I don't know enough about human, the why of that, but all I know is it's not good for the greater good.
Well, I think progress, the way I'd put it, is progress has converted the drive to survive into a drive to thrive. And so this kind of greed sort of takes over. And it ain't just the billionaires. I mean,
Hmm.
the where I live in this little small town. It's basically pretty wealthy. And the ways that the sort of people in my cohort protect that wealth through zoning regulations, not wanting people to build anything, through legacy admissions to colleges, and a
Yeah.
whole host of things, and tax
Right.
programs, things like the mortgage
Right.
tax credit. These are all
Right.
things that accumulate wealth and stick wealth into what we might broadly call the upper middle class, and are to the detriment of that. Now, these are all people who've got those lovely in this home science is real and blah blah blah, all those signs on their
Yeah.
front yard. But you talk to them about changing the zoning laws, and all of a sudden they're ready to
Yeah.
burn your house down. So
Right.
that's
Right. Right.
next door is a great place to go for this, to observe the sociological phenomena.
Right. And I see the same thing where I am. Is same thing, small, wealthy town, and it's like, I don't pretend that the ideas that I espouse here are going to be popular, because the people who made it have made it in this system.
Yeah,
And what do people? They don't want to give up what's not going to be good for them. And that's
right.
why you need a government, and you can't do it like boom. You have to do it iteratively. You have to start with
Yeah,
the big problems, fix the big problems, and work slowly the way down to where people can see the benefits of trying to do it a different way. I am as pragmatic as they come. I don't expect people to. I want people to get the idea and understand it, and then I want government to sort of work towards that. It's going to take a few generations, but if we work towards that,
yeah.
we have a chance to be sustainable and to make the world, to make our ability to live in this world for a long period of time peacefully a possibility.
Oh, that's beautifully said. And this has been a really, really terrific conversation. We've got over an hour now. But before I let you
Uh-oh.
go, can you tell everybody a little bit about where they can find you online if they want to learn more? Where can they get a copy of
Right.
The Human Idea or other works of yours?
Yeah, the my website is www.thehumanidea, And you can find my books on Amazon. Just type in Anne Riley and or the Human
I'll put
Idea, and
links
it'll
in
come
the I'll
right
put
up.
links in the description.
Yeah, yeah, but I welcome, honestly, I'd love people to just get the idea and share, especially questions and differences, because that's how you hash out an idea, is
Yeah.
you kind of break it down and beat on it for a while, and that's how you decide whether, something is worthwhile spending time on. But and I just want people, if they want, the message is do what you want, just don't hurt others. Is no matter where you are in the world, whatever profession you're in, it's a great way to live. I'm a lot happier this way.
Okay, beautiful. Well, again, Ann, thanks so much for joining us, and I hope we get to talk again sometime soon. This was a really
That
great
would be great.
conversation.
And I'm going to go find your book because it sounds really, really interesting.